Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 30th of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And as usually the most important and the most interesting updates are coming from Bakhmut, from this area. As you can see, there are not so many icons in the vicinity of this town, but all the meanings of all these icons are very important. And for example, the most important, the most interesting icon is about Konstantinovka, this town. I believe maybe the second or the third town in a row after Bakhmut falls, where the Russians will try to develop their offensive operation. For example, today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of missile attack in the vicinity of this town, mainly they were targeting, of course, the area along the railroad ways, the Russians managed to kill 200 soldiers, and 280 soldiers were wounded and were evacuated from this area. The Russians are saying that they attacked the 24th Mechanized Brigade in this area, the position and forces of 24th Mechanized Brigade, and the Brigade of Special Forces. So special forces that are responsible for doing some very important operation. In a minute we're going to find and we'll try to determine where exactly these brigades are located, trying to understand what exactly the Russians managed to achieve by those attacks. Another attack we can find in Kramatorsk, in this area in the vicinity of the railroad station, and the Russians were saying that as a result of missile attack on the territory of the railroad station, they managed to destroy like rail trains or like depots in this area with 200 tons of shells. That was a very big reinforcement, a very big like support of the forces in this area, and this is a very powerful attack against the Ukrainian forces in this area. Furthermore, some Russian sources are saying, and the Ukrainian sources confirm this information, that Ukrainians finally took a decision to evacuate from Bakhmut completely. The Ukrainians are no longer planning to fight till the last Ukrainian in this area. And if we take a look at this map is not updated. For example, the Russian deployment map shows completely different picture, but a little bit updated. We see that currently the Russians control the northern part of the western part of Bakhmut, and there are just 3 blocks left under the Ukrainians' control. The first one is between Khromovo and the hospital. The second one is this small Vuhledar inside of Bakhmut, this residential area with the high buildings, and the southern part in the vicinity of the MiG-17 stadium. So there are just 3 blocks. Let's go back to the Western sources map. I have already updated this map for better understanding of the situation. So this is the picture. And if you remember, even this morning, the previous update, this block was under the Ukrainian control, but during the day they took a decision to step back. And this is not like the rotation or like evacuation inside of the western fortification. This is the common decision of the entire army in this area to leave Bakhmut as soon as possible. Of course, many of you can say that we are going to still see the clashes in the western part of Bakhmut in this residential area, but something tells me that that decision everybody were expected, and we talk a lot that this area, exactly this residential block, is the most powerful fortification. But the recent events shown us and told us that Ukrainians are not holding the areas with the big buildings. They're trying to blow up the buildings. And if you ask my opinion, I will tell you that you will ask me when we can understand that Ukrainians took a decision to step back from the western part of Bakhmut. And I'll tell you that as soon as we start receiving the updates from this part of Bakhmut of explosions in the buildings and the ruinings of these and destroying of these buildings, this is going to be the first sign that Ukrainians are going within the next few minutes, even minutes or seconds, start their greatest evacuation operation from this town. This going to be some kind of operation which they will try to change and refocus the Russians, and meanwhile under these heavy explosions they will try to run away using and trying to save as much as possible forces and the manpower, and they will try to get in direction of Ivanovsk and of course in direction of Chasov Yar, and mainly they're going to use this road the road between like Kromova and this area. If we take a look at the Russian deployment map, this map shows us that the main forces are currently located in this area. Furthermore, as you can see, this map has been updated when talking about the forces of the Ukrainians, and currently we can't find, at least in the western part of Bakhmut, there are no like foreign volunteers corps, there are no Georgian forces anymore, there are no Belarusian forces anymore, there are no more Ichkerian forces no more. So I believe that during the previous days the Ukrainians were trying to evacuate the foreign volunteers. That was like maybe the most important part of the Ukrainian army in this town, and as soon as they finished this process, they started the process of evacuation of the rest of garrison in this area. And one more time, a lot of Russian sources are saying, and a lot of Ukrainian sources confirmed, that this night the Ukrainians, that the previous day the Ukrainians took a final decision to evacuate from this area. Furthermore, another important update: how did that happen, and what was the things that determined this decision from the Ukrainian side. And for these purposes, we need to return back one more time to the Russian sources map, to Konstantinovka, and one more time, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of missile attack against the 24th Mechanized Brigade and this Brigade of the Special Forces of Ukraine, they lost 200 soldiers, 280 were wounded. And the question is, where is these brigades are located? If you are able to follow the table I'm trying to collect, we can find the 24th Brigade, Mechanized Brigade, were attacked at least 4 times in a row during the previous week, starting from the previous Monday. And all the time this brigade was attacked in vicinity of Toretsk, Dzержinsk, and so on. And today that brigade was attacked almost in the same place, including Kramatorsk and Konstantinovka as well. Now let's go to the West Russian deployment map, and we can find, according to this map, this brigade is located between Bogdanovka and Kromova. This is the positions of the 24th Brigade. But if we take a look at the Western sources deployment map, we can find this 24th Brigade in the area of Kramator, of Toretsk-Nurk agglomeration. So this information completely corresponds to the piece of news that we received from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. So when talking about this 24th Brigade, there is nothing special if they are located in the vicinity of New York agglomeration. But if this brigade is located in between, let's say, Bogdanovka and Kromova, that means that Ukrainian forces along these railroad ways are in big trouble. And possibly this is the situation that can lead to another attempt from the Russian side to penetrate this area and to develop the Russian offensive operation between the road 0506 and the railroadways in direction of the town by the name of Canal, because exactly this area between the Red Cloud and the town by the name of Canal is the area of responsibility of the 24th Mechanized Brigade. And the previous experience told us that every time the Ukrainians lost, any time that any brigade lost their reserves, later we got some problems on the bridgehead that this brigade tried to hold. But another important brigade that was attacked by the Russians during that attack is the Special Forces. And if we take a look at the Western deployment map, we can find the Special Forces exactly in this Western block. This one. This is the Special Forces. This is the Shaman Detachment, 10th Special Forces Detachment. And the main purpose of that brigade was to hold as long as possible this Western fortification. And if we take a look at the Russian sources deployment map, we could find this brigade at the same area, but after the last update of that map, when the area and the vicinity of this fortification was colored in red, the Ukrainians moved this brigade a little bit to the west in the vicinity of the hospital, and now we can find this brigade here. So a little bit to the west. This brigade used to be in this area, but now this brigade is moved, so that means that Ukrainians took a decision to step back. And one more time, we will understand that the Ukrainians are leaving Bakhmut, and they're doing this very fast as soon as we start receiving updates about explosions and the destroying of the buildings in this part of Bakhmut. And believe me, this is going to be happen according to the Russian sources within the next 48 hours. The Ukrainians don't have more time for these purposes. Another important update from the Ministry of Defense is that the Russians destroyed the ammo depot with 200 tons of shells in Kramatorsk. And this is very strange information information, very strange piece of news for me. And the thing is that during the previous months, the Ukrainians reported that they accumulated around 80,000 soldiers in the vicinity of Bakhmut. Of course, we can applaud to the Ukrainians that they were able to collect such a big army in this area, and they have almost prepared themselves before unblocking operation of Bakhmut, but because of climate weapon, reading quotes, according to the Syrskiev head of Ukrainians, they couldn't develop and started this unblocking operation. This is one thing, okay. But you know that to support 80,000 soldiers, army, and there are a lot of tank brigades, mechanized brigade, artillery brigades, special forces, just the regular infantry brigades, you need to bring a lot of munition into this area and shells. And if we take a look at this map, and from logical perspective, we understand that the best solution to do this is to use railroad ways. To bring munition using trucks is not a very good idea, at least from the logistic perspective. If you are going to support this big army with just trucks with ammo and shells, you are going to have always lack of munitions and shell. And one more time, the best solution to do this is to use railroad ways. And the Russians understand, and we understand, that there is just one way how to do this. There is just one railroad that goes to Slaviansk and Kramatorsk, and this railroad goes from Dnipro, Pavlograd, Lazovo, Barvenkovo, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk. And believe me, there is a 24-hour satellite control over this railroad, and the Russians knew exactly what kind of weapon the Ukrainians are going to move when, and many other answers to many other questions the Russians had. And the Russians took their best, and they destroyed this railroad station with 200 tons of munition. And this is not just the case of bad situation for the Ukrainians. From the other side, I understand that, that this is like the type of war when your enemy and you are able to see and understand everything. The Ukrainians are able to see the disposition maybe of every single soldier from the Russian side. The same piece of information the Russians have as well. They can control the Ukrainians' movements and so on. And this situation that forced the Ukrainians to use the railroad to bring this munition, at least tells me that the Ukrainians do have a very big problem with entire support and supply of that 80,000 army in the vicinity of Bakhmut. During the previous weeks, we talked a lot about the problems of Prigozhin. He reported many times that he had a lot of problems with munitions and shells. He wrote a lot of open letters to the Ministry of Defense, trying to tell them that I need more shells if you want me to capture Bakhmut as fast as possible. But from the other side, we haven't seen any report from the Ukrainian side about munition and shells, and we imagined ourselves that, at least we didn't ask ourselves, and we thought that, wow, the Wagners have problems with shells, and the Ukrainians, they don't have, because they're not saying about this. But the current situation about this current case on the railroad station tells me that the Ukrainians do have a lot of problems with munitions and shells, and this problem is going to grow from day to day, and this can lead to unknown situation, unpredictable consequences for the Ukrainian army. And this is going to be another disaster consequences for this army, the absence of munitions and shell for the Ukrainian army. Another important thing about Bakhmut, and we'll move further, is the report of Ministry of Defense. The Russians were saying that also as in additional to the losses of the Ukrainians in Konstantinovka, the entire losses of the Ukrainians in this area were around 480 soldiers, 42 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. Furthermore, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported about fierce clashes in the vicinity of Belogorovka and Verkhovyanska. The Russians continue attacking the most hunted brigade in this area, 54th mechanized and 81st Air Assault Brigade. And as a result of impacts, those brigades lost up to 30 soldiers. But the Ministry of Defense created their report, so it's very difficult to understand whether the number of 480 soldiers of the losses on Donetsk front line includes the losses of the Ukrainians in Konstantinovka. to tell the truth, I can't understand and I can't tell you for sure about this report. So I believe that some of you can think that Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours lost up to 1,000 soldiers in this area, and you calculated both losses in Konstantinovka as a result of missile attack and the losses of the Ukrainians all over the front line that the Ministry of Defense reported. I think, if you ask me, that the number of 480 soldiers includes the losses of the Ukrainians in Konstantinovka. So it's just my opinion. So anyway, the losses for the previous 24 hours was from 500 till 1,000 just in this area. So, and this is about this Bakhmut area, and now let's go further and let's go to the south, to Donetsk. And there are very interesting updates are coming from this town, and some sources are saying that, not just saying that, there are more and more updates from the Russian side about the clashes in Marinka, and this is the picture of Marinka. If you take a look at the screen, you're gonna see the entire Marinka, and we ask ourselves a lot of times during the previous days, months, when the Russians can establish and are going to capture the entire Marinka, when the final push is going to be. And now let's take a look at this map. As you can see, there are just fields, ruins, and the sand. There are nothing more. There are no positions, neither for the Russians nor for the Ukrainians. If we take a look on the right corner, right in the top corner of this picture, you're going to see the water reservoirs. And if we take a look at the Russian sources map, this is the reservoirs that you can find on this picture. And this is a small bridge between these water reservoirs. And we can find this bridge in the same way in the north top right corner of this picture, if you take a look at this map, right? So as you can see, this is the Marinka. This is what has left from Marinka. As you can see, as we discussed, as I told you in the previous videos, Marinka and Vuhledar are the towns that the Russians took a decision to erase from the earth, or from the map of Earth. And now it explains, at least for me, everything. Explains to me everything. And my projection, my speculation, whatever you can, it's better for you to hear, that the Russians are not going to move further to the west because there are nothing to capture. And from the other side, I understand that there are no buildings where the Ukrainians are able to hide. And as I understand, let's go back to the Western sources map, that the closest Ukrainian positions are located in Grigorievka. So this is the Ukrainians' closest positions. This Marinka, this area between, let's say, the central street of Marinka and the Georgievka is in the gray zone. I believe that there are mainly like fightings and fierce fightings between commandos group from the Ukrainian, from the Russian sides, and scouts and so on. But this territory belongs to nobody. As a history, as a tradition, maybe this map, this part of Marinka is shown as the control is under Ukrainian control. But on the practice, in real life, this territory belongs to nobody, because if the Russians started their movements in this direction, they will be covered and attacked by the Ukrainian artillery systems, and the same situation is going to happen with the Ukrainians if they take a decision to get, let's say, to positions of Russian forces in Marinka. They will be covered and attacked by the Russian artillery. So no one's area, no one's territory, and no one's barrier. So this is the situation about Marinka. And from one side, this is good for the Russians because they were able to push the Ukrainians from Marinka, and the main thing, they managed to push the Ukrainian artillery system from this area. And currently, the only position that Ukrainians are able to use in this area for artillery is the area behind to the west from Georgievka, somewhere here. And of course, by that, the Russians were able to reduce the shelling and attacking of this artillery against Donetsk. But this is the only progress they managed to achieve as a result of that. Now let's go to Vuhledar, and as you can see, there are not much icons, but there are a lot of icons above the territory of Zaporozhye. As we know, this is the one front line according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. They reported that as a result of fierce clashes, artillery duels in this area, the Ukrainians lost 93 armored soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, including 1 tank and 3 artillery systems. And the most important piece of news about this front line is that for the first time since the first notice of the creating of new brigades under NATO control, the Ukrainians redeployed for the first time 116 mechanized brigade to the combat line. This is the piece of news. The Russians are saying that they redeployed this brigade in the vicinity of Orekhov. If we take a look at the Russians' deployment map, we can find this brigade in the area of Poltava, in this area, 116th, 32nd, 31st. Well, this is 116 brigade in the area of Poltava. If we take a look at the Western deployment map, we can find this brigade almost at the same area. So this is our 116th brigade, so that means that this information about the native disposition of this brigade is confirmed by many sources, and today, for the first time since the mentioning of the creation of this brigade, the Ukrainians moved this brigade to the combat line. What does it mean? It can mean that this situation can mean a lot. From one side, this can be some informational operation when the Ukrainians are trying maybe to show or to force the Russians to think that the Ukrainians launching their final step of preparation before the greatest counteroffensive operation. But from the other side, this is possibly a real step from the Ukrainians of redeployment of the attack phase to the combat line. Possibly everything is possible. We'll follow this situation because we know that Ukrainians have already prepared up to 15 brigades, and this is the first, so it's less than 10% that were moved to the combat line. They need to move more if they want to be successful. But if we are going to receive more and more reports about redeployment of these brigades to the combat line, and the combat line where this brigade will be overpopulated will show us the real destination of Ukrainian attack and so on. But now let's go to the Kherson area. The Russians continue destroying their positions, the Ukrainian forces, and of course one of the most important updates in this area, that as a result of artillery duels, the Russians managed to destroy another Raider ANTPQ-36 in this area. As now the forces are using this Raider to spotting mortars and on the positions of artillery system of your enemy on the very short distance. Let's say that using that radar, the Ukrainians were able to see and to hear the Russian artillery positions on this bank of the river, but that radar was destroyed, and currently that allowed the Russians to feel free at least a little bit and to have more possibilities to be flexible and mobile. And later the Russians managed to attack more positions of the Ukrainians on this bank of the river, and as a result of those attacks, the Ukraine lost up to 40 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system Stab B. And let's talk about the final frontlines, Kupiansk and Liman. There are no changes, the same picture. The Russians attack positions of 14th Mechanized Brigade and 92nd and the vicinity of Kupiansk frontline. When talking about Liman area, the Russians attack the same brigades of 25th Brigade between Makeevka and Yampol on the south, and also they attacked the positions of 58th Brigade in the motorized brigade in the Serebryanka forest. The same picture as we saw yesterday, the day before yesterday, and as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians lost 150 soldiers, 180 soldiers, my bad, 9 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems in this area. So, and that's it about the situation on the ground. Military Summer channel reminds you, and there are many violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.